Rings of Power Season 2 Trailer. The trailer for Season 2 of Amazon's Rings of Power has finally dropped. Let's take a look at what we are shown and how it relates to the books, or doesn't. What can we expect to see, and who will be the driving forces? Can they correct the mistakes of Season 1? Welcome back to Secrets of the Rings, where we delve deep into all things Tolkien. As this show, Rings of Power, is technically based on Tolkien's works, it calls for some evaluation by those who hold the man's works dear. The first season of Rings of Power was questionable, to say the least. What many fans found themselves worried about beforehand, like inaccuracies to lore and style, turned out to be worth the concern. Much of the story neglected the timeline of events and included intermingling of characters. There were problems that could have been salvaged, but the poor casting and lackluster writing left the audience feeling disappointed, if not entirely betrayed. Overall, if the show wasn't tied to the Tolkien fandom, which it hardly is, then it would be hard to imagine it gaining any sort of serious traction, even with the massive budget. No amount of spectacular visuals, which the show did have, can justify the transgressions against the spirit of Tolkien and his works. Season 1 was underwhelming and at times silly. Will Amazon make any corrections to the way the story runs? With almost 3 years to do so, we certainly hope so. Now let's take a look at what the trailer depicts. The first things to notice are a bit of a darker tone, with more visuals of fighting and battles. The first season spent a lot of time building up multiple storylines that ended in a very anticlimactic finale. This season would do well to keep the audience engaged, since the dialogue has felt superficial. The trailer tackles a number of different plot lines, but not all of the characters are present. One of the first shots is Halbrand, or Sauron, heading towards Mount Doom. It is hard to follow the storyline, as they've already introduced a version of Sauron, and now they are essentially running it back with what appears to be Anatar, Sauron's fair form. However, he doesn't really seem all that fair. It's quite literally Halbrand with elf ears and long blonde hair. And to pretend like the elves wouldn't immediately recognize as that is just strange. Perhaps this would have been a perfect time to recast the role. No disrespect to the actor, but he's not very elven-featured, nor all that intimidating as Sauron. This version of Anatar is arguably the biggest slap in the face to the fandom in this trailer. How long have fans wanted to see an epic visualization of his efforts in Eregion, only to be given this dweeb in a wig? It appears we will be seeing the sacking of Eregion nonetheless. In one of the last shots of the trailer, we see him surrounded by elves, but with the twisting of his hands, they appear to all turn to each other or otherwise dismiss Sauron. The trailer ends with the magical explosion that turns an idyllic landscape into a frozen wasteland, with the construction of a massive black tower. We are unable to determine if this is supposed to be Barad-dûr or even Angmar. There is literally no telling what direction this show will take, and neither would be surprising. If it is in fact Barad-dûr, it would be a bit of an unsurprising formation. Previous adaptations showed the actual construction of the Dark Lord's tower, with scaffolding and everything. We see a shot of Celebrimbor shielding his eyes from a great light that takes on the same effect as Sauron did in the Hobbit trilogy, where his silhouette resembles the Eye of Sauron from the Lord of the Rings films. This could be a dramatized entrance of Anatar, or an actual appearance by Sauron as himself. Celebrimbor is also seen, weary, dirty and paranoid, dropping rings into a cauldron or forge. This could be a dream sequence, but we know from the books that Sauron successfully reclaims many of the rings of power for the men and dwarves he looks to enlist. Are these other rings, perhaps? We're also shown a scene that resembles the prologue of the Lord of the Rings movies, where 3 hands don the elven rings. Could we get our first look at Cirdan, the shipwright in this show, the only known bearded elf? Perhaps he and Celeborn can make an appearance at some point, although Celeborn is only mentioned in Season 1. I guess we need maximum Galadriel screen time, and having a strong husband around would dampen the perception of her prowess and individuality. They really dropped the ball with the 2 main characters in Sauron and Galadriel. Galadriel was a major focus point for both the show itself and the fandom's complaints. Amazon sadly chose to approach the mighty elven icon with little attention to detail, foregoing the tall, elegant, beautiful and powerful Galadriel we all know and love. Instead, And again, no disrespect to the actress, Amazon chose to cast a small, modest blonde girl to be a boss lady on a horse, constantly looking for a quarrel. She seems to lack the wisdom and grace that we expect to see. At least we get to see her shooting flaming arrows into the forest. Her presence in the trailer is largely centered around combat still. One shot shows her in a defensive stance, with what appears to be a Barrow-Wight behind her. Shape-shifting creatures of the dark, implying a visit to the Barrow Downs, or Tir and Gorthard. This region in Eriador would eventually become part of Arnor, where the Numenorians settle in Middle-earth. The Barrow-Wights are said to have been sent by the Witch King of Angmar, however, implying more twisting of the timeline. Although, much remains to be discovered with where the show is going, so it may be other random ghostly figures. Elrond the half-elf is also present in that shot, as well as several more scenes of him in combat. This is one of the more exciting features of the trailer, as we've only really seen the older Third Age Elrond fighting in adaptations. It would be fun to see Elrond wielding an elven blade. Robert Aramayo is one of the better casting options in this show, but the flashy haircut doesn't help him to feel as much like Elrond as he could. Elrond spends much of the first season dealing with young Durin and the quest to get elven hands on some mithril. At one point we see Elrond leading a cavalry, but it's not shown against whom. Could it be against the dwarves? Did they end up in conflict due to the mining endeavors? Moria will experience some dark fate, as early on in the trailer we see Prince Durin proclaiming an ancient evil is awake. It could be Sauron, but we were also shown the Balrog in the last shots of Season 1, who will become known as Durin's Bane at some point. Or perhaps not, because, Amazon. Later in the trailer, a large mass of stone is seen falling on a bridge under Moria, and possibly even a shadow that is crossing up above. Could it be a winged Balrog in flight? Or is it something else? It could very well be caused by something other than the Balrog, such as a mining accident or attack from other beings. Much is left uncertain with Moria, but we do see the older King Durin with a large blue-gemmed ring. Will Sauron use it to turn the dwarves against the elves? Again, who knows where this show will go? Numenor is heavily referenced within the trailer. We see shots of what may be Armenelos, the capital city, and a white tree, very similar to the layout of Minas Tirith many years later. Queen Muriel is seen in distress, with one scene underwater. There is another scene underwater with a massive sea creature amongst debris. This is another sequence that may be a foreboding dream for her, as she knows the future of Numenor is likely going to end in a massive flood of sorts. Her father, Tar Palantir, will likely pass away this season. During that shot that depicts the release date, August 29th, we see a gathering on the cliffs of Numenor. This could be a funeral, or even a sacrifice. Will Sauron get back to Numenor this season? Will he spread his darkness through some of the rings, and not through physical proximity? One of the more epic shots of the trailer shows Ar-Pharazon landing somewhere upon a great eagle. In the books, it is said that several of Manwë's eagles inhabit Meneltarma and help the Numenorians until they start to rebuke the Valar. Will the eagles abandon them or join them? At the very least, it did look pretty cool. We are given a few shots of Adar, portrayed now by Samuel Hazeldin. He was a mutilated elf, turned to darkness, responsible for the creation of Mordor in Season 1. He also claimed to have killed Sauron, unaware of Halbrand's trickery. Will we see more hybrids in action this season? We are shown orcs on the move through a forest, as well as another orc licking the blood from his blade. This is seemingly a callback to Lurtz in the Fellowship of the Ring adaptation, but it just looked goofy in all honesty. If Amazon wants to include fan service, perhaps they can just try to get the story right instead. The new Gandalf is seen in Rhûn, smashing his staff into the ground, in some sort of conflict. There is a lot of speculation about this character, whether he is in fact Gandalf, or one of the Blue Wizards. Could this character run into the Blue Wizards this season? Will his identity be revealed for certain? Lastly, the trailer shows several shots depicting the storylines of Arondir, Theo, and Isildur. Bronwyn is not seen anywhere in the trailer. In another release by Amazon, we see Arondir standing at a burning pyre. Thus we may see the death of Bronwyn. Theo is shown crying as well. Theo's ears were covered for all of Season 1, leaving many fans to speculate that he is the child of Bronwyn and Arondir, having to hide his elven heritage. We see other shots of Arondir flipping around and looking cool, presumably rescuing or teaming up with Isildur. We see Isildur somewhere, looking up with an uncertain expression on his face. Believing he has to escape from Mordor, some fans are also speculating that he may be required to pass through Cirith Ungol, the Cleft of the Spider. Will we see some screen time for Shelob in this adaptation? Again, the lore doesn't have much to do with what we can expect to see, so much of it is fair game until more is released. It's difficult to truly predict what the sophomore season will do when they've already distanced themselves so far from the books. The trailer, much like the first season, was cheesy and underwhelming. The saving grace was the fact that there were no Harfoots shown in this trailer, nor what the fandom is referring to as the Nazgals from Season 1. That's not to say they won't reappear, of course, but let's enjoy this before they do. How will the show feel without the Sauron mystery? Or are they just going to rehash the Sauron mystery with Anatar, essentially what the first season should have been? Be sure to return to The Secrets of the Rings for more videos to come about the lore related to the show, and please like, subscribe, and leave us a comment with what your thoughts are so far with Amazon's Rings of Power. Thanks for watching, friends. Namarye.